Ceann Comhairle. So, members, Darragh O'Brien has done it again. Once more, he has promised one thing very loudly and very brashly publicly, but unfortunately he has delivered something very, very different. He promised he would increase Part 5 of the Planning and Development Act to ensure that all new housing developments would deliver not only the 10% social housing they're currently required to do under law, but he would also provide for another 10% for much needed affordable housing, whether rental or purchase. And that's a really important commitment, particularly given the rising rents and the rising house prices that we're hearing about every single day. And yet, when you read the fine print of what the Minister is actually doing, he has done nothing of the sort. At the very last minute of the proceedings of the Affordable Housing Bill before Christmas, in a session when only 90 minutes was allocated for committee report and all remaining stages, final Shannon stage amendments were introduced without adequate time for consideration, with no explanation, with no debate and with no vote. And despite the fact that I and other opposition members expressed concern about the technical import and consequence of these amendments and asked for a detailed briefing from officials, no such briefing was subsequently provided. The full significance of those amendments only became clear when they were explained in plain English in the detail of the government's new affordable housing plan. And what is that detail? Any landowner who bought their land between 2015 and 2021 will not have to provide any affordable housing on their site if they apply for planning permission between 2021 and 2026. And that means the vast majority of live development projects that are going to come for planning permission this year, next year and the year after will be under the old rules of 10%. And I have to say, Ceann Comhairle, if that isn't a sweetheart deal for large landowners, I don't know what is. What makes this even worse is the embarrassingly low levels of genuine affordable homes that are to be delivered under the new government's housing plan, 2,200 next year, although I don't think those targets will be met, possibly 3,500 the year after, and then 4,000 possibly in 2024 and 2025. Minister of State, and you know this as well as I do because you live in the real world, that is nowhere close to the level of affordable homes to rent or buy that is currently required. Now, I have to say, and it gives me no pleasure to say this, Ceann Comhairle, but this should not come as any surprise. Because if you look at what the Minister has done since taking office, when industry asks, Darragh O'Brien delivers. They asked for a shared equity loan scheme. What did Darragh O'Brien deliver? Against all of the advice of all economists and even government officials, he provided a shared equity loan scheme. When he was lobbied by industry to give an exemption for the increased stamp duty for the block purchasing of houses and duplexes to be leased back to the local authorities, he went running to Pascal Donoghue and secured exactly what industry asked him for, such an exemption. And here we have now, confirmed by the very, very late release of documents by the department on Friday evening, but thankfully due to diligent journalists in the Sunday Business Post captured and published on Sunday, developers asked for this sweetheart land deal and Darragh O'Brien delivered. And the consequence of this is that thousands of homes, affordable homes that would have otherwise been delivered, will now not be delivered. I have to say, I heard the Taoiseach today say this is what the Housing Agency recommended. That is not true, and I really hope nobody says that today. My understanding is that the Housing Agency was asked to produce a report, and they provided a list of options. They didn't recommend one option over the other, they provided a list of options. That is not the same as the Housing Agency recommending this course of action. In fact, my understanding is what the Housing Agency would have liked to have seen is the same kind of transitional arrangements that existed when Part 5 was originally introduced back in 2000. 20% introduced straight away, but where landowners had bought the land before the introduction of the bill, they would be fully compensated for the land value rather than existing use value. That would have been fair, constitutional, and delivered the genuinely affordable homes that people need. So, once again, Darragh O'Brien had to make a choice. Does he stand with large landowners, big developers and institutional investors, or does he stand with working people desperate to put an affordable roof over his head? He has made his choice very clear. He is not on the side of working people. Sinn Féin is, and that's why we've tabled this very simple piece of legislation to that exemption to ensure that all new planning applications from here on in would be subject to 20%. And if the Minister wants to table an amendment to the bill at committee stage to reintroduce the original transitional arrangements from the Planning and Development Act of 2000, we'd have no difficulty with supporting that. And on that basis, I commend the bill to the House.
And I commend my colleague Ona Breen for bringing this forward this evening, because it cuts through the layers of red tape and bureaucracy that gets to the very core of the torment facing workers and families across this state, and that's affordable housing. Without a shadow of a doubt, and by a country mile, it is the main issue that comes into all of my constituency offices. And of housing, affordable housing is the dominant feature of each of them. A quick look on Daft today tells me that the average rent in Longford Westmeath is €1,256 a month, and there are 21 properties across 2 counties available. And the impact of that lack of available properties and the high cost of them is absolutely profound, Minister. One family in permanent employment who this time last year would have been able to secure a family home is today making the decision which of their teenage children is going to share their bedroom, because there are no 3-bedroom properties available in their town. Exactly 0. Their nearest option would add thousands of euros every year onto their commuting bill, removing any hope of what they have of doing anything but surviving, never mind how they get their children to school. So the question is, which one of us, how would we make that decision? We are here, after all, as the representatives of these people who are living an absolute nightmare. And we as a society, we can't wait until 2026 for the half-hearted changes that the Minister is providing. We cannot let the thousands of potentially affordable homes to slip through our fingers in that time. And this amendment is the only way to ensure that those thousands of potential home buyers and renters can have that affordable roof over their heads. Now, while I welcome the government is not opposing this bill, there is a vast difference between not opposing and actually implementing real and meaningful policies. We simply cannot continue down this road to disaster. From March to June of this year, average property prices increased in my constituency by over 7%. That's absolutely, completely taken any potential out of working families' potential to buy their own home. And that same report outlined the lowest supply and the shortest time taken to sell a property in recent history. How many more experts, how many more reports, how many more agencies need to tell this government that there needs to be a substantially increased investment in affordable and social homes? How many more parents have to make the decision of which of their teenage children will share their bedroom before this government listen to reason?
Cronin.
Here we are in the Dáil this evening, where the people's interest must trump the interest of lobbyists. It is perfectly clear that the Part 5 developer exemption needs to go. If it remains, we're going to lose thousands of affordable homes. We see rocketing prices rocketing even further, and they've gone through the roof in North Kildare. Crazy house prices is not just an information and support group for distracted and disgusted potential buyers. It is the hard reality for people trying to put a home around them today. Except we have been here before. We've been in the grip of property fever, the monopoly money for shoebox semis. Soft landing, some said. Ignore Morgan Kelly, they said. But Professor Kelly was right, and many are still living with the effects. Others are not living at all. Today we have a different kind of housing crisis, and the exemption on affordable and social housing provision has to go. The government cannot go on indulging the whims of developers, the markets, to the detriment of society. We need housing that is public and affordable. The government had a choice: look after the developers or look after the workers. We know who they chose. If this exemption does not go, developers with thousands of houses in the pipeline won't have to produce affordable homes in a deep and growing housing crisis. We need to end the Part 5 exemption for large landowners and ensure that the full 20% is delivered. We need public homes, we need social homes. because in the end, we are the public, we are a society, and as legislators, we have a duty to put the people first, not profit first. I commend Deputy O'Brien for his bill, and I urge you not just to say you're going to, but to actually implement it.
Thank you, Deputy Gould.
I want to thank my colleague Deputy O'Brien for bringing forward this bill. And once again, it goes to show that Sinn Féin, we're here to bring forward positive solutions that will actually make a difference in delivering housing for people and for families. The government claims to know the impact of the housing crisis, but if you really knew the impact, why aren't you doing everything in your power to deliver housing for people who are desperate for it? The Sunday Business Post said the Minister was extensively lobbied by developers, and that's why this exemption came out of nowhere. And it also said that it is estimated that 10,000 homes have been lost because of this exemption. Now, so why did the Minister grant this? The only reason that ordinary people can see is that the Minister and this government have once again prioritised developers, investment funds and the big landlords and the big landowners over ordinary people. This government has failed to act. Just to let the Minister know, in Cork City Council, the local authority plans to build numerous affordable housing developments, but it still doesn't have the criteria from this government to build, and they're all on hold at the moment. Once again, the government is not delivering. But this is about housing, and it's about priorities. I have no faith in this government or this minister's ability to deliver housing. I believe that this government are looking at developers more than ordinary people. And that's the difference between this government and Sinn Féin. This is another broken promise. The Minister doesn't understand how bad things are out there for most people. There is so much I want to say about the crisis in housing. And obviously, with time restraints, I can't. But what I can say, Minister, is you have to act now. For once, will you put ordinary people and families first? Because if you don't, they will suffer.
Ward.
Count Corla. The government announced with great fanfare that they were increasing the Part 5 requirements for developers from 10% to 20%. And this would see affordable homes for those who are desperately waiting for real affordable homes double. And taking this at face value, you'd be right in thinking that this was a good deal for the ordinary working family out there. But like so many things of this government, it's very, very difficult to take things at face value. So when you get into the finer details of the government's plan, you will see there is a clause in place that exempts big developers from providing additional social and affordable homes until 2026. The people in my area who are locked out of the housing market by sky-high rents simply cannot wait to 2026. The workers and families who are living in unsecure rental accommodation cannot wait until 2026. I want to commend my colleague and my constituency colleague, Ona Bryn, for bringing this bill to the House that will effectively remove this exemption and put the ordinary workers and families in Lucan and Condalkin and across Dublin Midwest before the big developers. The government had a chance to put ordinary workers and families looking to secure real affordable homes first, but have failed again at the behest of lobbies from landowners and developers. There is no constitutional requirement for this exemption, so I ask, why did the Minister feel that this exemption was needed? This exemption could potentially result in the loss of thousands of real additional affordable homes. We simply cannot afford to lose any affordable homes in the current market. The failed housing policies of Fine Gael and now Fianna Fáil are the reason that we are in the housing crisis to begin with. Their tired old measures of putting private interests before public need are just simply not washing with people anymore. And I don't think that this government will have to wait until 2026 to get that message.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Quinlivan.
Just want to make some brief comments in the short time available to myself. This is an amendment that is necessary to remove the sweetheart deal offered to developers and investors. It is about ending the exemption to Part 5. At a time when the residential property price index figures shows a yearly average increase of property prices of 8.6%, a time when people are struggling to gain mortgage approval when paying high rents. A June 2021 DAF.ie sales report indicated that Limerick City has seen the biggest jump of any city with an average price increase of 15.5%. At this time, we have a waiver to include the inclusion of 20% social and affordable housing. This is fundamentally wrong and must be stopped. There is no thought of what is best for the people with this exemption. The only thought seems to be for profit. Business Post on Sunday reports that the government has been lobbied extensively by the developer friends, and there's no surprise for any of us in that. The long-suffering investors and developers may lobby you, and you can have them. The people I speak for aren't offered exemption clauses. I would rather speak for the thousands of people in Limerick on housing waiting lists, those overcrowded in houses where 3 generations of the same families are living in the same home. My constituency office is inundated, as other TDs have outlined, is actually inundated. Almost every single call we're getting is people in distress for housing. I know when I leave this debate, when I switch back on my phone, there will be messages from people. At the moment, if you look on DAF.ie in my city, there's 13 properties for rent. 4 of those properties are over €3,000 a month. 2 of the properties are under, only 2 of the properties are under 1,000, and they're 1 beds. Minister, this is ridiculous. You have the situation where working families can't get a social support, can't get any support to get on housing list because they earn a little bit too much and too little to get a mortgage. We have a massive, massive problem. If you look at Limerick, as I said, there's 13 houses available, properties and apartments available today in Limerick. We have probably 10 times that in voids, 130 probably 20 times that actually. And you might stand up and say you do X, Y, and Z for voids, but you actually don't. The red tape is too difficult for councils to get through. You need to look at that seriously. If you were seriously, and I believe you were dealing with the amount of people that we have come through our constituency offices, you would actually realise the crisis is out there. It's there in the here and now. My colleague Deputy Ward said people can't wait for another number of years. People need actions in the here and now, and we need to get some solutions that will deliver houses for people. And I don't believe you're up to the game at all.
Bhwadlum takeoch the Howard don Billa Shaw or my comrade Chocta Dollar on O'Brien. I would like to thank my comrade Deputy Owen O'Brien for bringing forward this important bill. It is vital that every means be utilised to build social and affordable housing. This bill ensures that developers are firstly not exempted in providing social and affordable housing under Part 5 and that 20% of any housing development must provide for social and affordable housing. The sunset clause that was put in place, which allows developers who secure planning permission before 2026 to provide only 10% social in a new development, is greatly flawed. And we said this at the time. The removal of this exemption will bring thousands of additional such homes onto the market that otherwise would not be available. The Dublin City Council housing waiting lists for Dublin North West, and in particular for areas such as Ballymun and Finglas, remains a very serious issue, and it has resulted in many families and individuals falling into homelessness. With increasing numbers on the housing waiting lists, and with many waiting a decade or more for house, it is even more important that priority be given to increasing the numbers of social and affordable housing builds. Affordable housing has already been delivered by O'Coulon Housing at a cost of approximately $200,000 for a 3-bedroom house. And this serves as a good model of real affordable housing. However, the government's idea of what is affordable will cost between $350,000 and to $400,000, and this is not realistic. Additionally, rents in the private sector have gone sky high, and a great proportion of an individual's income goes on rent, which is an average of $2,000 per month for Dublin North West. This bill will go a long way to giving those who are looking to get onto the property ladder or are in need of social housing some hope for the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Count Corla. I'd like to commend my colleague, Deputy Owen O'Brien, for bringing forward this bill. The purpose of this bill is simple, but its impact will have far-reaching benefits for thousands of workers amid this housing crisis. This bill will remove the Part 5 affordable housing exemption for developers who purchased land in the last 5 years and who seek planning permission before the end of July 2026. This exemption represents yet another sweetheart deal by this government for developers and investors. We have seen concession after concession for developers and investors, while we have workers and their families being forced to pay very high rent and move far from their families and communities in order to find accommodation. When will we start to see meaningful breaks for ordinary working families? We are fortunate in Dublin Bay to have many strong communities who believe in standing up for one another and for their community. I look at the Irish Glass Bottle Housing Action Group in particular. The Glass Bottle Action Group have been a constant source of community, organising for the delivery of affordable homes for Ringsend and Irishtown. For too long, locals have been getting priced out of their community, with investors swooping in to buy up whatever homes are available. To add to this, we have high-tech firms coming in and pushing up the prices of homes and rentals for working families who have lived and invested in the area long before the shiny, hugely profitable companies like Facebook, Google and now TikTok. We urgently need affordable public housing in the city, and when we say affordable, we mean affordable. Affordable to not affordable to the community, the investment funds. The affordable price of upwards of €600,000 per unit is laughable. We need the delivery of affordable homes at the price of €250,000, like on Coulon, as the previous deputy mentioned. In terms of public housing, we need to see a commitment from the government that these units remain on site within the community and not relocated far outside the area like that has gone before. We cannot let what happened with development of Capital Dock happen again, where the Part 5 units were not provided on site or even locally, but instead miles up the road from the local community. Public housing needs to be delivered locally. Thanks.
We're not opposing this bill, Minister, and I commend my colleague Owen O'Brien for bringing it forward. Exemptions for developers is the hallmark of successive government approach to housing. We've seen it when it comes to delays in banning co-living and the stamp duty exemption for long-term leases and apartments. But most recently, we have seen purpose-built student accommodation being given planning permission to convert into tourist accommodation in the midst of a student housing crisis. Large student accommodation complexes have been given permission to operate as tourist accommodation on the bogus claim that there's not enough demand for it. And yet we see thousands of students all over this country cannot get fit-for-purpose affordable accommodation. The reality is that most students cannot afford to live in the high-end purpose-built student accommodation, and these landlords are unwilling to lower the rent. Exemptions for developers and large-scale landlords that has led to the situation where they've been allowed to take hundreds, if not thousands, of student beds out of the system is completely wrong. It seems to be beyond Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael to even imagine a situation where a landlord or developer should lower the rent if they can get tenants at the extortionate rates that they are charging. Now we have students staying in hotels and hostels and student accommodation that's not fit for purpose. Also, that profit margins of developers and institutional landlords could be protected. We need a new strategy for student accommodation that has affordability and public ownership at its heart. And we need to increase the recurrent and capital funding for institutes of higher education to allow them to build on-campus accommodation. And we need to end the conversion of purpose-built student accommodation to tourist accommodation and encourage colleges to strike a fair balance between attracting international students and meeting the needs of Irish students. And that is why I and Sinn Féin will be supporting the Union of Students in Ireland this Thursday when they launch their No Keys, No Degrees campaign to draw attention to the current student accommodation crisis that has left thousands of students across Ireland struggling to secure accommodation. Minister, this government is completely out of touch with students and families when it comes to accommodation, to the wider society when it comes to accommodation as well, but for students and hard-pressed families. And I would ask you to please take action now. We cannot have a hands-off approach to this.
Stanley. Thanks, Concordia, and welcome the opportunity to speak on this bill and commend Deputy O'Brien for bringing it forward. The facts are is that consecutive governments have failed to provide affordable homes across the country on a scale that's required to address the housing crisis. There hasn't been one single affordable home delivered in Laois Offaly in almost 15 years. And there also does not appear to be any plans in place for cost rental projects in either counties. The government, just like the predecessors, seems either incapable or unwilling to deliver affordable homes for ordinary hard-working people. What we have here is a sweetheart deal in the government's housing plan. The government's housing plan has a huge, large loophole in it, which will allow developers to avoid providing additional accommodation to purchase for purchase or rental homes. The government plans allows developers to avoid selling 20% of the units that they build to local authorities for affordable to purchase and rental homes, which is why we've brought forward this legislation here. Sinn Féin projects that closing this loophole will ensure an additional 10,000 homes genuinely affordable built between now and the end of 2025. This is a kind of practical solution that we need, Minister. We must get to grips with the housing crisis. Since 2013, in Laois, house prices has increased by 98%, and in Offaly by 64% in the same period. These are astronomical increases, which have completely obstructed families and workers from purchasing their own homes. Instead, property developers are buying them up and landlords, and they're renting them out to families at spiralling rents, skyrocketing rents. Half the constituency doesn't have any kind of, they're not in rent control zones, and the 3 areas there is, they're not effective because of loopholes again. I'd also argue that if we had rent controls put in place years ago, this kind of market manipulation would not be happening. One of the things driving up house prices is the fact that we don't have rent controls in this country, because it's very, very profitable for landlords and developers and speculators to buy them and to rent them out, and they can charge what they like in rent. Rents are gone way out of control altogether. Consecutive governments, and I hate saying this, they've allowed this crisis to develop. We've been saying this here for years, while workers or families are trapped in rental accommodation with no affordable or cost rental options in sight. So to conclude, we need affordable to purchase housing schemes and cost rental schemes to be provided in Laois Offaly and every other county. We need 20% of all developments, Minister. Pauline Tully.
I want to commend my colleague Owen O'Brien for bringing forward this motion as well, and I do want to welcome the fact that the government are not opposing the motion, and you say you're going to review it. So I hope that that will actually lead to action, because I mean the most common issue among my constituents is housing, or I should say lack of housing. And I know that's the same for practically every member of this House. And I mean, housing prices are continuing to rise and housing rents are rising in tandem, and both are happening due to the lack of housing supply. I mean, the solution is to invest in social and affordable housing on public land, but I mean, successive Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael-led governments have removed the ability of local government to build social housing. And now the government is exempting big developers from the Part 5 20% social and affordable housing provision. I mean, in my own county of Cavan, for example, between 2016 and 2020, Cavan County Council only had 36 new properties built. And under Part 5 applications, private developers delivered one house to the local authority. Now, I mean, there are categories of people currently seeking housing. I mean, you have those on the social housing list waiting maybe 7, 8 years, sometimes longer. Many of them ask me, can we not be allocated a vacant council house that they know is sitting there idle for months and maybe years, and they do it up themselves? They're that eager to get a house, and they can't understand why these vacant properties are not being renovated and reallocated. I have numerous disabled people waiting in excess of 10 years for social housing because another government body has failed to provide the support needed to those people. So not only are they waiting on a suitable, accessible home, but they are also waiting on the support needed in order to allow them to live an independent life. And then I have people who are working and who earn above the threshold for social housing, but they can't get onto the property ladder because apparently they have the inability to show that they are saving money on a regular basis. Now, how in God's name can you tell me that how can someone save money for a deposit or show that they are a consistent saving trend in their bank account when they pay up to half of their income on rent? So I know people who are turning down work to avoid going over the threshold for social housing because they can't afford exorbitant rents without half. So the Part 5 exemption needs to be scrapped immediately.
leis an teachta fearil agus an teachta óbhrein.
Good morning. I was watching Reeling in the Years there during the week. I suppose it's for some of us at a certain age, it helps jog our memories. But the year in question was 1966, and it was a momentous year. It was the anniversary of the 1916 Rises, 50 years. Nelson's Pillar was blown up. But also, as part of a segment on it, there was a young Cathal Shannon, and he was talking in terms of the difficulties that young couples were finding in relation to buying affordable housing. And they were talking in terms of, you know, thousands of pounds that people had to come up with at that time. But I suppose the difference between then and now was that even going back to 1960s, even you look at the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, a family on a single income could afford to buy a home. And unfortunately, at a certain period, and I was in this stall during that period, and I trace it back to the time of, you know, that we moved away from this idea of the collective and we moved towards the individual, and that's when the changes started to happen, and people were squeezed out of the market, and it was about, you know, this introducing greed, and people wouldn't be able to afford their own homes. We're in the grips of a housing crisis, and we can't afford to waste any opportunity to get families out of homelessness and into secure accommodation. And it'd be wrong to allow any chance for thousands of social and affordable homes to come onto the market so that big developers can line their pockets just a little more. Only by providing social and affordable housing can we ever stand a chance of reducing homelessness in this country. An ESRI report only just last week showed that lone parents, migrants, people with disabilities, travellers, single people, younger people, all struggle to source funding for housing, and are dependent on an expensive rental market to meet their housing needs. So the government's only idea was to bring in a shared equity scheme which will only push the cost of houses higher still. This government refuses to bring in a vacant property tax, they refuse to build social housing themselves, and they refuse to bring in rent freezes. Housing for all, a reheated version of past Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael policies that managed to be even less ambitious than those other plans that the government failed to deliver on. So until the government commits to ramping up capital investment in social and genuinely affordable homes, the most vulnerable in our society will continue to be struggled. So I don't want people watching reeling in the years and years to come, and they're saying, you know, and the same parties, same Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, making the same mistakes, and people still excluded from the party. So we need to act now.
Margaret, and I'd like to commend my colleague Owen O'Brien for bringing forward this bill here tonight, and I also acknowledge that the government is not opposing it. The reality is that we have a huge issue in terms of affordability, and this is something that, you know, we're all aware of, and sometimes you feel like you're repeating yourself, but the reality is things aren't changing in this regard. And we just saw the CSO recently, in the last few days, published its residential property price index for July 2021. And when you look at houses in the west of Ireland, they've increased by 9.1% year on year. So things aren't changing. Although the fact of the matter is we may know that there's a huge affordability crisis, nothing is changing in this regard. And then we saw that apartments outside of Dublin have increased by 14.6%. And Minister, just outside my estate in Galway City, Merview in Galway City, there's an apartment block with over 300 apartments being built, and it's built to rent. And locals are absolutely outraged by this. They feel that their children, their grandchildren will never be able to afford to live in Galway City, to live in the Merview area. And they're really concerned as well about the impact that is having in terms of building communities. And Merview is a proud community and a traditionally strong community spirit in that area, and they feel that this bill to rent that they're not pleased with is going against this community spirit, as well as continuing to lock out their children and their grandchildren out of home ownership. The fact of unaffordability in Galway City is just reached an absolute crisis point. We know that the HAP limits are far too low for being able to rent in Galway City, and just today I had a fella in my office, and this isn't something that is is unusual. He came into my office, he said he can't get a place within HAP limits in Galway City, he can't drive, he has health issues, and as a result, he has had to go into homeless accommodation. This isn't something that's a once-off, Minister. This is the reality for people in Galway City.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to Minister Burke for his response. First of all, excuse me, I find it hard to believe that the reason why the government aren't opposing this bill is because they hope to see it receive pre-legislative scrutiny in the committee. There's a long list of opposition bills that have passed second stage in the last Dáil and in this Dáil, and government members so far, despite repeated requests by opposition, have yet to table any of that legislation for pre-legislative scrutiny. I hope I'm proved wrong in this case. I suspect in a few months' time that won't be the case. Mr Burke is also right. There is no quick fix. But you've been in government for 10 years. And the cause of this housing crisis is bad housing policy. And if you continue the same failed housing policies in the present and in the future, then there will be no fix whatsoever. With respect to the actual substance in front of us, I think we've learned a couple of very interesting things today. So the first is, despite the fact that the Housing Agency provided their review of Part 5 to the Department in December of last year, no opportunity was afforded to members of the Oireachtas Housing Committee to consider any of those matters, not even to consider the legislation itself because of the way it was introduced. And that begs a range of questions. What's also interesting is the very carefully worded speech by the officials for the department. I always like comparing the carefully worded speeches by officials with what ministers often say to the press. Confirms some of the concerns that I had at the start, that in fact the particular recommendation that government introduced in the legislation wasn't in and of itself strongly recommended by the Housing Agency, but transitional arrangements were. There's a logic to that. It also confirms that there was more than one option provided by the Housing Agency, and it would be really helpful if the government just published both the Housing Agency's report and any correspondence between department officials and the Housing Agency with respect to earlier drafts, so we can tease through all of that. And I'd be particularly interested to know, for example, because it suggests in Minister Noonan's remarks that the Housing Agency really wanted to see a transition arrangement similar to that contained in the original Act, which was to move immediately to 20%, but compensate landowners who were affected by clear changes in the compensation that they would get. That would have been a much more sensible thing to do. Nobody would have been out of pocket. No homeowner would have bought properties at a higher price, and we would have got the 20%. But even if you think the kind of transitional arrangement you propose is a sensible idea, why 5 years? I mean, that doesn't seem to me like a carrot and stick at all, or it's certainly a very, very large carrot and a very, very tiny twig. Why not a year or 2 years, and on what basis was a 5-year transitional arrangement meant? And I take the Minister at his word that the decision in relation to the Part 5 exemptions was made before the submissions from various lobbyists on the government's housing plan. But are you seriously suggesting that none of those same organisations didn't engage either with politicians or with officials, or indeed with the Housing Agency during the review or in the period between December when the review was conducted and whatever month the decision was made? And again, we can save ourselves an awful lot of trouble in FOI request if you release all of that information so we can assess it and we can judge it for what it's worth. The core problem here, however, is that we were told Part 5 was going to increase to 20% so that more affordable homes could be delivered as a matter of urgency. What this exemption does, and there's no surprise why developers were so keen to get it, is it essentially means that we're not going to move to an additional 10% Part 5 housing, affordable housing, for many, many years. Sure, if I buy land next year or the year after, I'll be captured, but in real terms, we know how the development cycle works. And that means those members who have suggested that in real terms 20% social affordable housing is unlikely to be delivered till closer to 2030 is probably not far wrong. And for me, the tragedy is this. There aren't 36,000 genuinely affordable homes to purchase in the government's housing plan, because a very significant number of those homes are actually unaffordable, open market price, private homes, purchased with a very, very questionable, in my view, very controversial shared equity loan scheme. We can argue the merits of that scheme or not, but those homes aren't affordable, which is why people have to be given up to 100 grand of extra debt, albeit with a different interest regime. So therefore, the number of actual affordable homes that will be delivered under the new plan, particularly in 2022, 23, 24 and 25, will be embarrassingly low. And that is why this exemption, and it is a sweetheart deal, Minister, to developers. They are benefiting at the public's expense. That's why it was the wrong thing to do. That's why it should be revisited. And I look forward to the Minister convincing his colleagues in our committee to bring it to PLS as a matter of urgency. I suspect that won't happen. This will gather dust like so many opposition bills that have passed through second stage. But we'll pursue it because we believe ultimately we need more affordable homes now, not at some distant point into the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy O'Brien. That concludes the debate, and having concluded the debate, I'll put the question as follows. Shean Tarishkin, no. Go Leifer and Billa and Dara Hur Anish, that the bill be now read a second time. Natachti Atar ar Hav Natarishkin Aberdish To. Natachti Atar in Aquina Aberdish Neil. Sheelam Go Will on Tarishkin Richa. In my opinion, the motion is carried. The motion is carried and the bill is accordingly